Welcome to The Beat. I'm Ari Melbourne. As we come on the air, we have an eye on what's happening in Texas and a bit of a fact check for all the people who said concerns about democracy or authoritarianism in last year's campaign against Donald Trump were overblown. Quite the opposite. Indeed, you don't have to take anybody's word for it. You can see it happening out of Trump's own mouth and in the action on the ground in Texas. You can also look to the vocal backlash to what many people view as an effort out in the open starting far earlier than some of Trump's last efforts when he was in the first term, which were closer to the election. Now, we are a long ways away from the midterms, let alone another presidential. And yet, it's happening and earlier. And people are against it because democracy remains pretty popular. From town hall protests to Vice President Vance and Defense Secretary Hegseth now getting an earful today in Washington. There are a range of concerns, and we can't always interpret boos exactly by their intent, but democracy is one of the big issues. Texas Democrats are also trying to stand up against something that most modern Republicans would have criticized any time before the MAGA era, and that they certainly still are suing to stop when it happens to them in California. But this is what Republicans are doing: a blatant power grab in an off-year, unusual time to carry out what Trump demanded, to change the rules in the middle of the game to try to get more seats because they are worried about losing a free and fair election in these upcoming midterms. So California Democrats are saying it's time or past time to fight fire with fire. If Republicans are able to strong-arm these tactics in Texas, California Dems, led by Governor Newsom, say they will cancel it right out using their powers in real time. No more long-winded speeches about precedent and declining republic. They are going to do what they say they need to do to blunt what looks like a very abusive, precedent-breaking effort to redraw and kind of basically steal some of these districts in Texas. So that's one way to go at this. Trump, meanwhile, has been very blunt. He thinks that what he's doing is working. He's been censoring and attacking free speech. He's been threatening. We know all that. He's got a Justice Department that's going after some of his political opponents, and he's made false claims that are blatant. He's going after mail-in voting, and then he's been doing an old Trump style of laundering and raising things and then saying, oh, he's only joking. Russia, if you're listening, and then his aides say it was a joke. That was the very first campaign. We're way past all of that, and so joking, or maybe not, about canceling elections in wartime as he meets with a wartime leader, or toying with the idea of an illegal, unconstitutional third term, something that the Supreme Court and courts have never allowed, so he wouldn't even usually be able to get on the ballot. And yet, amidst these other campaigns I'm telling you about, he continues to muse about doing something that is flatly banned under our Constitution.
You know, Vladimir Putin said something, one of the most interesting things. He said, your election was rigged because you have mail-in voting. So you mean if we happen to be in a war with somebody, no more elections? Oh, that's good. I wonder what the fake.
You like this idea?
Yeah.
No.
Speaking of, we got a long time to go. We have a long time. You know, we have almost 4 years to go. And that's a long time. But despite that, so many people are saying, you've got to run again.
Who's saying that? Why is he doing that? Is it to move the goalposts and then act like it's a compromise if he doesn't run for a third term and make other ongoing efforts to kneecap democracy look somehow smaller, kind of an expanding of the authoritarian Overton window, as some of the political scientists say? Or is he just getting ready to try to see if he can break the whole thing and run for a third term, turn this country into a dictatorship? And you say, oh, wait a minute, that sounds extreme. It is extreme. But don't let them trick you into word games and rhetoric or trying to shoot the messenger or go after the media, which we've seen in many countries and we see right now in this one. Because what we're talking about is what Donald Trump says and does. We're not talking about, it doesn't even always matter how I describe it to you, as long as you can get the facts and evidence and make sure you're getting reliable information, which is what we do around here, what we practice. So forget the word dictator or the word authoritarian for a moment if you want to, and remember that Donald Trump did not leave office peacefully last time. That is the great stain on him, regardless of anything else you like or dislike about him. And we've reported before, there are things that he says and does that many people in the country like. That's fine. He won more votes in the last election. That's fine. But he also trafficked in, supported, and then pardoned people convicted of the crimes against the United States, attacking police, sedition, pardoning every last Jan 6 attacker.
The plan was simply this. We had over 100 congressmen and senators on Capitol Hill ready to implement the sweep.
Do you realize you are describing a coup?
No.
If you committed violence on that day, obviously you shouldn't be pardoned.
J.D. Vance, welcome to your new life. Yesterday, Donald Trump commuted the sentences of and pardoned everyone, from the most violent criminals who participated in the insurrection to those convicted of lesser offenses.
There has been no greater embrace in the modern era of people who attacked police and tried to overthrow democracy than those pardons. Pardons so extreme that now they've happened and people got used to it. That's part of being alive. People can get used to a lot of things, but so extreme that J.D. Vance, then vice president-elect, was saying in public, well, obviously not all of the people who attacked. Yes, all of them. And that is the context for other things Donald Trump is doing that are not technically currently illegal. For example, the show of force in Washington is still within the legal limit of basically a month limit on that. I'm not going to get into all the details, so I'm not telling you it's technically illegal right now, although he's been testing it in California and there, and he may try to blow past that deadline. But the wider impact is a federal government using a show of force, pushing others to the side, using ICE raids not only to do immigration enforcement, which again is part of their work, but showing up at opposition party members' press conferences, sometimes getting involved in arresting them. Some of those cases dropped, others continue. The show of force is linked to the attacks on democracy. And now Republican governors say they want in. Remember, there's not a bunch of riots right now in the country. This is not historically a time where you'd have National Guard troops. And while the numbers you see are relatively small, we're showing you Republicans doing this again as kind of a little step, because who really wants to debate 135 personnel? The point is to get it started, just as Trump started in California and D.C., and now we're seeing Republican governors test this. If you don't think that this is a risk for being abused around election time, you haven't been paying attention. Meanwhile, the people being patrolled are concerned. From the nation's capital to California to Texas, this is what it looks like when the attacks on democracy get more physical into the streets, encroaching while legislatures try to redraw the maps to prevent what? A free and fair midterm election that might dislodge one aspect of a Republican agenda right now, that from Trump to the anti-healthcare bill that came out of Washington to the ongoing secrecy over Epstein, an agenda that remains very unpopular around the nation. I want to bring in Molly Jong-Fast from Vanity Fair and our friend Jason Johnson, Morgan State professor and MSNBC analyst. Jason, our reporting is careful to distinguish what is technically legal or legal for a few weeks versus other things that are flatly criminal, like attacking the Capitol. But do you see an interconnected effort here? And does that concern you with so much time left before the midterms?
Absolutely, Ari, because it's all just stress testing, right? And it leaks out not just from this White House, but at the state level. So from the White House, you have sending in military troops into Los Angeles, waiting to see what courts say, because if the courts say that's allowed, they will continue to do that in other cities. You see them stripping funding from Washington, D.C., and then federalizing the police and seeing how long they can do it and running the possibility of extending the 30-day deadline. And then what do you see happening in Texas? Locking members of the legislature in a building or forcing them to sign permission slips. All of the authoritarian urges of this administration are leaking out. So whether it's legal or illegal, it is definitely against the spirit of democracy that everyone, except people in this White House, have lived with for our entire lives.
Molly?
I think also it's important to remember that intimidation plays a big part here. This is the District of Columbia. They feel they can do it because it's not a state technically, so it is legal. But I also think there really is, this is a city that is majority minority, 90% voted for Democrats, filled with media and a lot of Democratic politicians and a lot of judiciary. So these are groups that they really want to keep in line and intimidate. So I think that's a real thing too. Also, I want to add these checkpoints that they have, where they used, it's technically legal to do checkpoints for sobriety and for car accidents, but checkpoints just because somebody is annoying you or someone doesn't look the way you want them to, that is very much out of the mainstream.
Right, and it's testing it and encroaching on it, as we've seen. Jason, the absence of bad news is not good news. But I have something that is less bad news, low bar. But we had the Democratic leader, Jeffries, on this program, and we asked him exactly about these issues. And he's doing what he can within the minority powers that he has. But he also made a point that's just a sad autocratic math. It's not good news. But here's what he said about what is in danger and what might still be protected in the coming midterms.
The good news is, to the extent that there's a silver lining in our electoral system, is that we don't have a national election system. It's state by state by state. And in many of the states where there will be competitive gubernatorial elections, and certainly in the overwhelming majority of the states where the House will be decided, there are Democratic governors, Democratic attorney generals, and Democratic secretaries of state.
Fact check, true. So, Jason, that actually is something that the parties spend a lot more time on than everyday people, which is where the really competitive districts and why it would be functionally harder to pressure or steal. And then on top of that, it seems that he has a messaging goal here to tell people, don't just give up and see the troops and think nothing can work. He's very concerned about the general election in 28, but he's saying in 26, what you heard there, that voting will, he believes, matter.
I believe it will too, Ari. I just don't know how reliable it'll be. I think sometimes we have to step back from the sort of red state, blue state thing and recognize that there are large numbers of Republicans in blue states and large numbers of Democrats in red states. And so the issue is, will a fair election be allowed at the local level? Right? Most of these states have a reasonably good idea as to how to run an election that allows everybody to vote and participate. But what happens when they need federal funding for additional machines? What happens when they need federal funding to open up voting places if there's been some sort of natural disaster after hurricane season? That's where we're concerned. Most cities, most governors, most mayors, they know what they need to do. Don't tap the glass. They don't need the federal government getting involved, telling them how to do things. And that's what I worry about heading into the midterms. You don't need Trump getting involved. We can work democracy at a state level well.
Now, Jason, you've done two things there. One, like the professor analyst you are, you've really broken down what the other issues are, that Jeffries could be right, but there could be other malfeasance, or National Guard troops concentrated only in areas where certain people are and certain people vote. Second, you've made a subtle reference to Tyler, the Creator's new album. And Molly, I'm sure you were as tickled by that as I was.
Oh, I was.
Don't tap the glass. Further thoughts, Molly?
Yes. No, I think that's a really good point. And look, this is the Voting Rights Act, right? These are the problems that have always been structural and what have stopped us from being the multiracial democracy that we can be. I think the scariest part for me is Abbott just taking these 5 seats, that he's going to try and take 5 seats from Democrats. There's just no historical precedent for that. And again, I don't want to say bright spot because we really are in an uncharted moment in our democracy. But the one possibility is, if this is as unpopular as I think Trump is worried it is, there is a possibility for a dummy mander, right? Where they have less good numbers, they have less good margins. And so many of the voters that Trump might have gotten because of his sort of singular ability to message may actually be lost to Republicans without Trump. And I think that is a real question. But the anti-democratic urge of the governor just taking 5 seats away is mind-blowing.
Right. Yeah. No, and you both hit the import of that. Jason, as Tyler would say, I got to peel off like an orange because we got a lot of other stories. My thanks to both of you, Jason and Molly. A little light amidst the darkness. I'll tell folks what's coming up. Fox News hosts secretly texting when they thought no one would ever find out. And tonight, we have those texts. I'm going to read them to you. Also, $100 million conflict of interest coming out of the Trump White House, and this federal judge rebuking the Trump DOJ for what has already been reported. Their hoarding and secrecy around the Epstein files while pretending to ask a judge to get involved has just blown up in their face. They're losing the bid and being hit for diversion tactics. We're back with Melissa Murray in 90 seconds. Donald Trump and his DOJ have played many different games with this Epstein case, and we've been reporting on several aspects. Today, they got a setback in court for a very basic ploy that, frankly, hasn't been working on the MAGA crowds or others concerned about getting the Epstein docs, because they went to a judge and said, hey, we want you to help us release some of the transcripts. This is not even the key part of the Epstein docs that matter, and now it's blown up in their face. The judge denying the request to release a small part of Epstein docs, those grand jury transcripts. The judge noting that there are 100,000 plus pages of Epstein files and other materials that dwarf what is basically less than a slice of 1% of all of that, these 70 pages of grand jury transcripts and materials. And then a little truth. The judge reminding the Trump administration that because they have all those documents and most of them are not grand jury privileged, the DOJ, the Trump administration, are the logical party to simply disclose it. And the grand jury motion itself, the judge notes, is effectively a diversion. I'm joined by Professor Melissa Murray from NYU. Welcome. Your thoughts on what kind of judicial reaction we got here? Because while there was a bit of business to deal with, whether you release those materials, the judge made a point to kind of call out what was a pretty obvious diversion.
No, you're exactly right, Ari. Judge Berman, who is the Southern District Judge who heard this motion, really could have answered all of this by using that hot dog suit meme where we're all looking for the guy who did this. Judge Berman appeared to say, yes, people want to know about the Epstein files. There's considerable public interest here, but we have a bedrock principle of not releasing grand jury materials to the public for a lot of different reasons, including maintaining the secrecy of grand jury proceedings, which is a bedrock principle of our legal system. And yes, there are certain circumstances where we might depart from that, but they are extraordinary circumstances, and those circumstances haven't been met here. You are asking government for 70 pages of information that was supplied by a single FBI agent. There's no witness testimony here from any of the victims. And in fact, the things that the public really want to know are contained in that trove of information that the Department of Justice compiled in its investigation of l'affaire Epstein, that it says it can release at any time, but still refuses to do. And so I think Judge Berman got it right here and, gave this government more airtime than it really warranted in saying that I've taken all of these requests seriously, but in fact, you are the ones to actually satisfy the public interest here by releasing the files that you already have.
Yeah, and one reason that these type of tricks work is that people aren't always totally paying attention. So to pick a basic example everyone knows, sometimes somebody is pushed out of a job and they put out a statement saying they want to spend more time with their family. And you think, who's that even going to work on? But it keeps it moving. And a week later, people don't really remember because they're not fixated on that unless it's your thing. Here you have this active MAGA-aligned group of people that are following every detail of this. And so unlike cover stories that are weak but kind of might help, it seems like this is only further aggravating the very people, some of whom have spent literally years clamoring for answers for these documents. They're seeing through the smokescreen, and they're upset. Joe Rogan is very influential. Here's what he's saying. This is new.
But the problem is this is a bipartisan issue.
It's bipartisan. It's meant. I don't know. I heard as a Democratic hoax.
Yeah, I don't think that's true.
But
Well, it's certainly not a hoax if you go to jail. It's certainly not a hoax if Ghislaine Maxwell's in jail too. So like she's in jail for sex trafficking. She's in jail for sex trafficking. But the question is to who? Who's she in jail? Who, you have to be sex trafficking to somebody in order to go to jail, right?
Yeah.
So who? How's that work?
So that's some of the wider environment. What happens in a case like this, Melissa, where the judges called them out, the DOJ caught between claiming they want to release stuff and now being put on notice in a very public forum? Go ahead. Most of it you could release if you actually cared about the transparency you promised.
Well, I just want to sort of put this in the context of the broader attack on the lower federal courts here. I think one of the plays here was to put this in the hands of a district court judge like Judge Berman. It's been in other hands of other district court judges, the same issue. And they've all said, no, we're not going to depart from the bedrock principle that we don't release grand jury proceedings to the public. And I think that was intended to gin up more ire, more rage against these judges. We've already seen the attacks on the judges from this administration. I think this was intended to do that. I'm not sure that it works here. I think most people will recognize that what Judge Berman is saying is that, yes, you're right, there is public appetite for this, but it is the Department of Justice that could sate that appetite by releasing these files. And as we know, there has already been a request from Congress to release these files. And apparently we are supposed to get, over the course of the next few days, I believe beginning on Friday, Congress is going to be able to release those files, or at least some portion of them. So if there isn't public responsiveness here to like if they don't release those files to the public, I think there will be more questions, but it won't be because of these judges.
Yeah, all fair points. Professor Murray, thank you so much. I want to tell folks before we get out of here, by the end of the hour, the Emmy-winning star of so many great shows, including Parks and Rec, Nick Offerman, is back. Also, the grift from crypto to this bond trading. Donald Trump insisting on doing more business out of the White House than any president ever. We're going to get into that, and you're going to hear the texts, some of them never released before, that show exactly how Fox hosts viewed their role as Trump tried to steal the election. The story we sort of began the night with, these attacks on democracy. Now there's accountability. Fox on defense. Remember, this is a new case in addition to what they already settled over those election lies. That's next. Fox News hosts privately texting each other and executives about efforts to steal the 2020 election, to overturn Trump's loss in ways that they clearly thought would never become public. And for some of them, they might have been right for a few years until now. Court documents in a multi-billion-dollar defamation suit by Smartmatic now are busting those texts wide open. The New York Times and other outlets reporting on the messages between hosts who viewed their role, some of them, as bolstering Trump or even trying to overthrow an election or cover that effort. Giuliani and others, of course, pushed lies on Fox about the election. Some of the accountability has already happened. We have seen Fox settle cases and pay out record-breaking losses in a different case. This is related, but by Smartmatic. Here's Fox host Jesse Waters texting Greg Gutfeld, quote, "Think about how incredible our ratings would be if Fox went all in on Stop the Steal." That's in December, when the then discredited effort before January 6th was viewed as outside the mainstream so far that even Fox wasn't covering it much. Stop the Steal was the Orwellian term for trying to overthrow Trump's loss. Jeanine Pirro, who of course has been rewarded since then with a role in the Trump administration, was bragging that her efforts would help make a difference in Trump's direction. Quote, "I'm the #1 watched show on all news, cable all weekend. I work so hard for the president and the party." And notice she's saying that to the party's leader at the time, who you see there, a Trump official. Now, Trump and the people pushing that lie was, A, they were claiming he won the election he lost, and B, they were claiming there were ways that they could still somehow lawfully overturn his loss. But once the Supreme Court and others dismissed that, which we've covered, what they were advocating was unlawful and in some cases criminal. This is an issue, the basically failed coup, that we've reported on extensively, and we've always given people time, if they're willing, to face questioning. Take a Trump aide who was later convicted, Peter Navarro. He spoke about this to me. He spoke about it on Fox. Here he was in 2022.
The last one was the Arctic Frost, which was the fake electors one, which there was nothing fake about President Trump's efforts on that. The remedy was for Vice President Pence, as the quarterback in the Green Bay sweep, to remand those votes back to the 6 battleground states.
Do you realize you are describing a coup?
No.
Like Jeanine Pirro, Navarro has clearly stayed in Trump's good graces. He's rewarded with a White House job again this second term. But that's after he went to prison for refusing to cooperate with the government or tell the truth about that effort, which again today on Fox, he's still defending. Now, other Fox pundits are in the administration. It's not just Pirro, of course. So in all fairness, you could say that this is just where Trump hires from, even if Pirro had maybe never crossed the line into saying that she viewed her role in media as literally helping the president and the party. So it's a wider issue. Trump has also been attacking mail-in voting. We have these voices in positions of influence in the media and now in positions of power in government as we learn things that they never wanted to come out, and only because other private parties like voting machine companies allege that they were harmed to such a degree in business that they have a defamation case. 5 years later, this is what it takes to get a little more of the truth. I want to bring in the Pulitzer Prize-winning author and columnist, Gene Robinson. Welcome back.
Good to be here, Ari.
Great to have you. You could imagine some people saying, are we still on this? Why is this still going? But of course, it's some of the people who were so secretive that would love for it to go away. It's entities they allegedly harmed, or that's what Smartmatic says in court, that are fighting for their justice. What do these texts reveal to you?
Well, a couple of things. Number one, if you are you're on the air, right, and so you text the head of a party saying, I'm working as hard as I can to help the president and help you, then what you're doing is not journalism. Now, it's something else. And I don't know if Jeanine Pirro, frankly, ever claimed to be a journalist, but it's not journalism. That's not how journalism works. That's not how journalism can work. And the second thing is, don't write it down. Don't put it in a text. Don't put it in an email if you don't want to see it on the front page of every newspaper in the country, potentially. And so you would think that people who are in the communications business would have a better sense of it. But this is actually serious. I mean, this is a real case by Smartmatic, and you recall Dominion Voting Systems won a settlement of something like $800 million from Fox for having been defamed in the Stop the Steal claims about voting systems that were supposedly rigged, that in fact were not rigged, that were fine. And the same kinds of things were said about Smartmatic. And so it's appropriate that they're pursuing this case, and it's certainly appropriate that we cover it.
Oh, absolutely. And as you mentioned, the price was high for Fox. They settled that case and ousted some of those people. Tucker Carlson was fired from what was a highly rated show soon after. The company didn't say there was a direct link, but there was a series of events. I'm also careful to say that we're learning new things. Some of them make these hosts look very bad, as you say, violating journalism. Other evidence just gives you a fuller picture. So Bret Baier was concerned enough about a fellow host's false information, Bartiromo, that November 5th, 2020, we see him texting a Fox executive to say none of what she was tweeting, that's the reference in the text to Maria Bartiromo, quote, none of that is true as far as we can tell. We need to fact check this crap. What does it tell you that the sheer extreme attack on an election that was already over also divided some of the hosts who apparently, if you read the text literally, were concerned about what they viewed as crap lies?
Well, again, if you are approaching this, what you're doing, or being on the air on a supposedly all news channel, if you're approaching it at all from a journalistic perspective, if you hear something or you see people who are your colleagues saying things that are patently untrue, you get alarmed, because that's not supposed to happen, and somebody ought to be stopping this. That shouldn't happen. And again, lesson two, if you want to say that. I think it'd be better if you picked up a phone. You'd save yourself a lot of embarrassment, I think, and delivered that message in a different way. But there is a split in Fox News, right? There's always been a split there. The polling unit at Fox, for example, has always played it straight. I mean, they do good polls, and sometimes those polls are unfavorable to Donald Trump. They're unfavorable to Republicans. They get blowback from their viewers, but the polling unit just says, "Look, we're doing a serious job here." And there are some people like that at Fox, and then there are people who don't approach their jobs that way, who approach their jobs, frankly, cynically. And you saw the Jesse Waters text. I mean, imagine what our ratings would be if we took this line, if we pretended to believe this conspiracy.
Well, it's like a parody out of Succession. I mean, it's so extreme. And B, as you have said throughout this discussion, if you're a news outlet, that comes first. And it is obvious. It goes without saying that if you're willing to lie about anything, your ratings could go up. That's why many conspiracy theories are popular. Duh. Gene Robinson, thank you. Go ahead.
I think Logan Roy would say to some of these hosts, "You are not serious people."
These are unserious people. There we go. Our thanks to Gene Robinson. We'll see you again soon. Happy summer. When we come back, RFK in the hot seat again, and the reports about Trump's conflicts of interest when we return.
It's hard to escape that there's something slightly undignified about all the Trump family's efforts to monetize the presidency, all of the different crypto deals, all the different efforts to get these things into the public market, all the hats, all the lawsuits against media companies.
South Park certainly agrees with that assessment from a New Yorker journalist. Donald Trump constantly suing people for money while he is president and trying to make money off the presidency. But do you wonder at this early stage in the second term how much Trump is making? Over $3 billion already from that New Yorker journalist's account. And today we have fresh revelations that Trump is also investing over $100 million in bonds this year. Interestingly, since January, when he took on, of course, this job, the bonds are bundles of debt, and they relate to federal policy. NBC reports Trump began the buying spree right after he was sworn in. Let's take this in full. The day after, I'm going to read from this. Trump began the bond buying spree one day after being sworn in on January 20th. It includes these entities that could be directly impacted by his sweeping agenda. This is a scandal in plain sight. A conflict of interest because Trump can, of course, make money off this. He can delay or deny certain policies in order to make money. His career, of course, has long tried to monetize his name. The difference now is he has a day job.
When it comes to great stakes, I've just raised the stakes.
My new game is Trump, the game.
The God Bless the USA Bible.
At Trump University, we teach success. That's what it's all about.
That's the real deal. That's the real deal.
Today, we're here to introduce Trump Mobile.
We are announcing the launch of Trump Coins, a true symbol of American greatness.
Who could have seen this coming? The fact is, the presidency, because of its power, is not weighed down by some of the rules and conflict requirements that members of Congress or even the cabinet have. So Trump has abused that. In the long run, the question for the voters, even if he doesn't face another election, the voters who want to hold his party accountable or his agenda in the next midterms is, does this serve you? We're going to fit in a break, but when we come back, Nick Offerman is here with our friend Joyce Vance. Welcome to a special edition of Fallback. joined by two great guests, the award-winning actor Nick Offerman, known to many as legendary Ron Swanson from the Parks and Rec hit show. He's also earned critical acclaim for roles in shows like Fargo and The Last of Us, where he earned an Emmy.
Hey, Ron, you're not going to slaughter that pig here, are you?
Not to worry. I have a permit.
This just says I can do what I want.
I didn't do this thing that they're-
Don't tell me. The establishment has ears everywhere.
I'm sorry. What? Getting older faster than you. I like you older. Oh, I'm exhausted.
Nick and I are going to be on the road this summer.
The Range, his new film Sovereign, is out now, and our friend of the beat, Joyce Vance, a federal prosecutor, law professor at the University of Alabama, co-host of Sisters-in-Law on The Insider. She has a new book, Giving Up is Unforgivable, a manual for keeping a democracy, and the proud mother of chickens, as many MSNBC viewers know. Welcome to both of you. How you guys doing?
So far, so good.
Good.
Good to see you,
Joyce, how are
Ari.
you?
Good. Nice to see you.
Great to have you both. Joyce knows her way around this, so we'll start with you. What's on your fallback list?
You know, on my fallback list this week is the measles. We really need the measles to fall back. Eradicated in this country in 2020. They are surging back already in 2025. We have more cases of measles than we've had in any year since then. So this is the anti-science crowd, right? Ari, you and I almost always talk about the law and the fact that we live in an era where politics often replaces justice. This is politics replacing common sense and public health, because all it takes to keep measles at bay is vaccinating young kids. We're not doing that, and now our communities will pay the price.
Yeah, I would say measles and measles misinformation with all the vaccine debates that kicked up, as you said, after COVID, both should fall back. Nick, what's on your mind? What's on your list?
I became aware of an AI-generated rock band called the Velvet Sundown that apparently got a bunch of hits on Spotify and became very popular, which I find to be horribly dystopic. I think that things that are generated by AI creatively are a sign of cancerous society. And I urge its creators that I urge to use your humanity, use the powers that your creator, that Mother Nature has given you, because that will always be more fascinating and valuable than anything an algorithm can create.
Well put. You know, Nick, I took a listen to the band. It's uncanny. They sound a little bit like some local band you would hear. They are also doing something for a part of the audience that I think fits with the problem you identify, which is because of how things work, they're kind of pretending to be humans. I mean, it's like if you're online and you're trying to deal with something and you realize you're dealing with a robot, that's very different from saying, okay, is there a person on the other end of this issue or challenge or what have you? And I know your field has dealt with this, and the strike dealt with some of this, right, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, you know, in the world of creativity, whether you're receiving the artwork or creating the artwork, that's the magic of being human. That's what consciousness is about. That's the greatest gift that we have. And when you allow AI to generate any of this, you lose all of that value on both ends. It's like the great homogenization of our society by corporations in general. I would rather have my own unique creations, things that I can make myself sustainably, than any choice that a catalog or a factory can crank out for me.
Yeah. Joyce, the courts don't exactly allow AI robots to come in and litigate, but we've already seen this crop up there as well, with lawyers or others sort of using AI and whether they're getting the right or accurate information.
there have been repeated problems with AI hallucinating, which I think is this amazing phenomenon, right? Where if a lawyer asks AI for some precedential cases, AI, if it doesn't have them, it just makes them up. And so lawyers who have not been careful, lawyers who have just picked up what ChatGPT tells them and pops it into a brief, have gone into court only to be called on that. And let's just say judges don't take that as a very good thing.
Go ahead, Nick.
I would just back up Joyce's expertise. You know, there's a tried and true system that we've developed by doing our homework and being able to verify the information on which we base things like legal opinions. And so all of the causes to use AI in this way simply spring from laziness. And the great Wendell Berry said that good work is our joy and our salvation. If you have good work to do, that fills your day and keeps you from sitting in the pub. So that's another great reason to avoid AI for me, so I don't drink too much beer.
Well, you know, I love it because we did our fallbacks, but we also got something positive past the fallback, which is thinking about, if we can, occasionally, what Nick said, which is what makes us human and how do we want to deploy our humanity and our energies. So I love that. And want to thank Nick Offerman and Joyce Vance for joining us on Fallback. Appreciate you guys. Right now, Texas lawmakers are in that debate over a Republican plan backed by Trump to try to strip House Democrats of 5 seats. The vote is coming up. And we want you to know, although it didn't come in this hour, you can also catch the debate streaming live, ongoing right now on MSNBC's YouTube channel. So if you're interested, go online, just search MSNBC YouTube, and you will see it as it unfolds.